By the time you reach my age, you think you've seen every kind of humiliation. I was wrong. I was sitting in that leather chair, hands folded to hide the tremor, while my former daughter-in-law squealed about 7 houses in Miami Beach, flashing the deeds like party favors, taking selfies with my husband's signature. Can you believe it? She kept saying. Oh, they believed it. The room rang with applause. Perfume watches catching the light. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and read my name. 140,000 square foot warehouse in Yazoo City, Mississippi, mineral rights included. The words drifted across the table like smoke. No one asked what they meant. They were too busy pitying me. I could feel their eyes on my dress, on the purse. I've carried 15 years, the consolation prize, the poor ex-wife. I stood up, bones aching pride, shaking off the dust, and looked at my son. Dean, I asked softly, you don't know, do you? When I stepped out of that law office, the summer air felt heavier than the walls I'd just escaped. Humiliation clings to you at my age. It settles into the bones, slow and cold like a storm that knows exactly where to strike. I could still hear the applause echoing behind the door, muffled now but sharp enough to sting. People celebrating wealth that was never theirs to earn, and pitying me for what they thought I lacked. I walked down the hallway, slowly steadying myself with each breath. The floor tiles blurred a little, not from tears, but from the kind of tiredness that comes when dignity has been stripped in front of strangers. My purse felt heavier than usual, as if the envelope inside carried not paper but the weight of every assumption they'd just made about me. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. I paused, letting the warmth touch my face. Funny how the world keeps shining, even when someone decides you've lost everything. The walk to the parking lot felt longer than it was, as if every step stretched out the shame I was trying to swallow. 7 mansions. The phrase looped in my mind like an old song you don't even like but can't turn off. 7 mansions for a woman who'd never lifted anything heavier than her own vanity. And a warehouse for the woman who once held that family together with both hands. I crossed the asphalt slowly, the heat rising in soft waves blurring the white lines on the pavement. My Honda sat in the far corner, the same car I'd kept running through every chapter of my life. Tight months, quiet seasons, lonely years. Reliable, humble, a little like me, I suppose. As I reached for the door handle, that phrase whispered again, 7 mansions. Not with envy, no, I'd outgrown that. Long ago, but with a quiet ache, a reminder of how easily people mistake glitter for worth. I sat down, exhaled, and let the silence settle around me like a thin blanket. The engine started with that familiar little sigh, the one I've always liked. Not loud, not showy, just dependable. I pulled out of the parking lot, letting the road take me wherever my hands guided. Though my mind was still back in that mahogany room, surrounded by people who believed they'd witnessed my downfall. The drive home was quiet in the way only a long-used loneliness can be. Memphis traffic hummed around me. Honking, rushing living, but inside the car, there was just stillness. A stillness I'd grown used to over the years. The kind that doesn't ask questions, doesn't judge, just lets you breathe through the ache in your chest. I watched the familiar streets pass by corner shops, old churches, brick buildings holding their own tired stories. Funny how a city can stay steady while your life shifts underneath you. By the time I turned into my apartment complex, the silence felt almost comforting, like slipping back into a room where no one expects anything from you, not even pride. Mrs. Patterson was out on her balcony when I climbed the stairs, watering those petunias she talks to like they're grandchildren. She looked up the moment she heard my footsteps. That woman has the kind of eyes that notice things. Small things, quiet things most folks overlook. Well, hey there, Ella, she called gently. Everything all right today? Such a simple question, such a soft voice, and somehow it hit me harder than anything Kinsley said in that conference room. I tried to answer, really tried, but the words caught somewhere between my throat and the part of me that still remembers how to be strong. I managed a small smile, the kind you offer when you don't trust your voice. Just a long day, that's all. She nodded, not pushing, not prying, just offering that neighborly warmth I didn't know I needed until it found me. Funny how a gentle question from someone who owes you nothing can hurt more than the cruelty of people who should have loved you better. Inside my apartment, the door clicked shut behind me, with that soft little sound I've always found comforting. A sound that says you're home now. You can finally put the weight down. I set my purse on the dining table, the leather worn smooth from years of being held through too many hard moments. For a second, I just stood there, letting the quiet settle. No applause, no bright laughter, no pretending. Just the hush of a space that had held my grief, my healing, my small joys. And now this strange new ache. My eyes drifted to the envelope peeking out of the purse, the one James left for me. His handwriting steady and familiar, curved across the front. Ella, a simple name, my name, but it felt heavier than anything they handed out in that law office today. I reached for it, then stopped my hand hovering. Grief has a way of slowing you down, and love, real love, sometimes asks you to sit with the truth before you open it. Before I picked up that envelope, a memory rose up quiet, uninvited but clear enough to stop my breath. James in those last months, thinner than I'd ever seen him, shoulders, no longer squared like the man who once carried every burden before it could touch the people he loved. His smile had become softer, then gentler somehow, but his eyes, oh those eyes. There was an apology living in them, not spoken, not named, just resting there the way regret rests on a man who finally understands the cost of his own choices. I remember sitting beside him in that hospital room, pretending to read a magazine I couldn't focus on. He watched me with that same quiet apology, as if he was trying to tell me he wished things had been different, that love hadn't always been enough to keep us standing side by side. He squeezed my hand once lightly, and even now I can still feel that goodbye. I walked into the kitchen, needing something to steady myself. When grief comes in waves, you learn to reach for small rituals, the kinds that keep your hands busy, while your heart tries to remember how to breathe. I filled the kettle, turned the stove on, and watched the blue flame catch. My fingers trembled just a little as I set out the mug. Earl Grey, the same kind James used to bring me on Sunday mornings back when life still felt like something we were building together instead of something we were trying to salvage in separate rooms. As the water began to warm, memories rose quicker than steam. James laughing in our first apartment. Dean taking his first steps across a living room floor, littered with building blocks, the three of us crowded around a too-small kitchen table that somehow held all the happiness we needed. By the time the kettle whistled, my hands were steady, but my heart felt anything but. I carried the mug back to the table, the warmth seeping into my palms like an old friend trying to comfort me. The envelope lay where I'd left it, edges slightly curled, as if time itself had been waiting for me to be ready. I wasn't, but some things don't wait for readiness. They wait for courage. With a slow breath, I slid my thumb beneath the seal. It opened easier than I expected, almost gently, as if James had known my hands would shake. Inside was a single folded letter, the paper soft from being handled more than once. His handwriting stared back at me, steady, deliberate, familiar, in a way that made my chest tighten. Ella, it began the loop of the E so distinctly, his, if you're reading this. I paused, the room suddenly, too quiet, my heart suddenly too loud. It's strange how one sentence can pull you across years, across love, across loss, until you're sitting face to face with a man who isn't there anymore, but whose words still know exactly where to touch you. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the paper rest between my fingers. It felt warmer than it should have, almost like a pulse, like a last touch from a man I had once promised forever to. My breath shook on the way in, steadied on the way out. Sometimes that's all grief is, teaching your lungs how to work again. Then I opened the letter fully and let my eyes fall into the first lines. Ella, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I imagine the family has put on quite a show. A sad little smile tugged at my mouth. That was James always seeing people exactly as they were, even when it hurt. His words moved gently, but each one landed with weight, settling into all the quiet places inside me. As I read, something unexpected stirred. Not anger, not bitterness, just a soft aching question rising from somewhere deep. "James, what have you done?" The letter shifted, then James's tone changing the way a sky changes before rain. His handwriting pressed a little deeper into the page, as if even the ink had carried the weight of what he was trying to say. "Ella, there's something I never found the right moment to tell you." My breath caught before my mind understood why. "I'm sick, worse than I let on. The doctors say it's serious, and time hasn't been kind about it." I felt the words before I fully read them, a tightness blooming under my ribs spreading slow and cold. Even now, even after everything between us, the thought of losing him, carrying that burden alone, stung in a place I thought had long gone numb. He must have known. He must have seen the fear in my face that last time we met for coffee. The way I noticed his hands trembling, the dimming in his eyes. And still he stayed silent. I pressed my fingers to the page, whispering into the quiet. "Oh, James, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Reading his letter pulled me backward to a morning I'd tried hard not to revisit. The day James called out of the blue and asked to meet somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knows us. His voice had carried something hollow, something that made me stop stirring my coffee and simply listen. We chose Yazoo City, Magnolia Cafe, a place small enough that memories echoed louder than conversation. I remember driving 3 hours with a knot in my stomach, telling myself it was probably nothing, while knowing it wasn't. The cafe smelled of biscuits and old pine floors, the way places in Mississippi often do. And there he was, James, sitting in the corner booth, shoulders curved, inward hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking. When he looked up, the smile he tried to give me fell apart halfway. "Ella, thank you for coming." I knew then that whatever he was about to say wasn't something a person can deliver over the phone, or without breaking something in both of us. I slid into the booth across from him, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. James looked older than the months since our last meeting. Should have allowed cheekbones, sharper eyes sunken, the way a candle dims when it's burning too fast. His suit hung looser on him, and his hands, they trembled just enough for me to notice, just enough for him to try and hide. When he finally exhaled, it sounded like surrender. "Ella," he murmured, staring into that untouched coffee, "we need to talk about my estate, about the will." My heart tightened. Estate conversations only happen for 2 reasons, fear or preparation. And in his eyes, I saw both. He tried to smile, but grief flickered behind it. "I don't have as much time as I hoped," he said softly, "and I need to make decisions while my mind is still clear, before people start deciding for me." I folded my hands in my lap, grounding myself. "All right, James," I whispered. "Tell me what you need to tell me." James reached into the leather satchel beside him, the one he used to carry to business meetings. Back when confidence fit him like a tailored suit. But that day his movements were slow, hesitant, almost apologetic. He pulled out a thick stack of folders, edges worn from being handled too many times. "Here," he said, pushing them toward me, eyes lowered. "These are the Miami properties." I opened the first folder, expecting glossy photos, the kind realtors use to dazzle. What I found instead were numbers columns and columns of them. Mortgages, interest rates, balloon payments. Debt stacked on debt like a house built on sand. 7 houses, 7 breathtaking sunlit mansions on paper. 7 financial sinkholes beneath the surface. I flipped page after page, each one heavier than the last. "James," I whispered, unable to look away from the red ink. "These aren't assets, they're traps." He swallowed hard, guilt flickering across his face. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I need you to understand what comes next." James leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face, as if the truth itself weighed more than his failing heart. When he finally met my eyes, there was no anger there, just a kind of tired knowing that only comes to a man who's watched something unravel thread by thread. "It's Kinsley," he said quietly. "Ella, she doesn't love our son the way a wife should. She loves the Monroe name. The doors it opens, the shine it gives her." I didn't say anything at first. I'd seen it too, those glances she gave Dean when he didn't act wealthy enough, the way she treated family like props for her image. James sighed, his voice softer than the cafe hum around us. "She's been tracking my assets, asking Dean about inheritance timelines, reading between lines that were never meant for her. She's planning a future built on money she thinks she's already entitled to." He looked down at the folders again, his fingers tracing the corner. "And I won't leave our son in her hands without preparing him for who she really is." I let the folder close gently, the weight of it settling against my palms. The numbers, the debt, the careful calculations written in red. It all felt like a warning bell I wasn't ready to hear. I looked at James, really looked at the man I'd once trusted with every version of our future. "James," my voice came out thinner than I intended. "What are you doing? Are you—" I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. "Are you punishing Dean because that's what it felt like? 7 ticking time bombs disguised as luxury. 7 burdens a son could drown under." He shook his head immediately, almost desperately. "No, Ella, God no." But the fear still pressed against my chest. "You know he isn't built for this," I whispered. "For disaster, for humiliation." James reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "I'm not trying to break him," he said softly. "I'm trying to save him before it's too late." James shook his head again, more firmly this time, as though he needed me to feel the truth of it. His eyes, tired, sunken, but still somehow steady, held mine with that old stubbornness I used to fight and love in equal measure. "No," he said softly, but with conviction that cut through the quiet of the cafe. "Ella, I'm not punishing him. I'm saving him." I felt something twist deep inside me. Saving him from what? From whom? James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "He's 40 years old, Ella, and he still thinks life works the way Kinsley has taught him, glitter first, consequences later. He doesn't understand the cost of anything, not money, not loyalty, not love." He paused, breathing slowly, as though choosing every word with the last of his strength. "If I leave him real wealth, now she'll drain him dry within a year. But if I let the illusion collapse, he might finally see what he's been standing on." His hand trembled on the table. "This isn't cruelty, Ella. It's the only chance our son has to grow into the man we both hoped he'd be." James let out a breath, then reached for a different folder, thinner, but handled with far more care. He laid it between us like something sacred, something heavy with meaning I hadn't yet understood. "Now, this," he said quietly, "is the part no one in that family will ever think to ask about." When I opened it, I didn't see debt, no red ink, no overdue notices, just maps, cross-sections of earth, shaded layers of limestone depth measurements, mineral content, geological surveys stamped and certified, the kind of documents only an engineer or someone married to one would recognize for what they truly were. My breath caught. "James, this is Yazoo," he nodded, "the warehouse. The 40 acres you always said had potential." I traced a blue-shaded vein running through the map, a long, elegant curve beneath the property. "Groundwater," I whispered. "Clean, pressurized, abundant." James leaned back, watching my reaction with a quiet, bittersweet pride. "You saw it first, Ella," he murmured. "Long before I ever understood its worth." James tapped a finger gently against the shaded blue vein on the map, the way someone might touch a photograph of an old memory they never fully appreciated. "It's not just groundwater," he said softly. "It's an aquifer, Ella, a clean one, untapped, pressurized, the kind companies fight each other to get even a fraction of." I leaned closer, heart thudding with that old familiar rhythm, the one that had carried me through engineering school, through long nights analyzing soil samples, while Dean slept in his crib. "This purity level," I whispered, studying the mineral profile. "It's rare, almost untouched. James nodded, watching me with the quiet confidence of a man who finally understood the brilliance he once took for granted. It runs straight under the property. The warehouse sits right on top of the best access point. You always said Mississippi has a way of hiding its treasures where outsiders never think to look. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, pride maybe, or recognition. And you're telling me this because the warehouse isn't what they think it is. James folded his hands as if steadying himself before revealing the part he knew would shake me most. There's more, he said, voice low. A lot more. He pulled out another document, this one stamped with corporate logos, so large they barely fit across the header. Nestlé, Coca-Cola, Danone, names that didn't waste time with small opportunities. I've been negotiating, he continued, quietly, carefully, preliminary contracts for extraction rights. Renewable, long-term, and structured, so the landowner, he looked directly at me, collects royalties every quarter. I scanned the numbers, my breath catching. James, these projections, hundreds of thousands per quarter. And that's conservative. His eyes softened. Try millions, Ella. 2.3 million every 3 months. Escalation clauses, percentage increases tied to volume. No debt, no risk, just clean, steady income for decades. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. All this I whispered, fingertips pressed to the page. Hidden under a warehouse, they all laughed at today. James nodded. That's why I'm giving it to you. Because you're the only one who understands what real value looks like. James watched me absorb the numbers, the maps, the contracts, watched the understanding settle into my expression, the way dawn settles slowly over a quiet field. Then he gave a small tired smile, the kind that carried equal parts pride and regret. Ella, he murmured, you've always seen things other people don't. The words caught me off guard. For years, I'd been the practical one, the steady one, the woman who patched leaking sinks and balanced household budgets while others soaked in the shine of the Monroe name. Practical was their polite word for ordinary, for less. But James didn't say it like that. He said it like a truth he wished he'd spoken sooner. You saw potential in land no one cared about, he continued. You saw character in people before they proved it. You saw our son, long before he lost sight of himself. I looked down at the map again, throat tight. Maybe, I whispered, I just learned to look deeper. James nodded softly. That's exactly why this has to be yours. James let out a long, weary breath, the kind that carried more truth than any sentence could. He rested his elbows on the table, fingers laced loosely, eyes fixed on a spot just beyond my shoulder, as if he were trying to see the future. He feared our son wouldn't survive. Dean, he said quietly, he has to learn failure, Ella. The words felt like a blade, wrapped in velvet, soft in tone, sharp in meaning. I straightened slightly. Failure, James, he's our son. He's kind, loyal. He's sheltered, James interrupted gently. Sheltered by us, by the comfort we built, by the life he married into. I swallowed hard because deep down I knew he was right. Dean had spent years being protected from consequences, from responsibility, from the hard truths life eventually demands payment for. If he doesn't fall, James' continued, voice unsteady, he'll never learn to stand without leaning on someone who doesn't love him. Someone who only loves what his last name can buy. His eyes lifted to mine, full of grief but conviction too. This isn't to break him, Ella. It's to give him the one thing we never managed to teach him, I whispered. And what's that? James exhaled softly. Resilience. His words settled between us like dust in a quiet room. Slow, inevitable, impossible to ignore. I stared at the map, the contracts, the layers of earth-whispering wealth. No one else had the patience to see. And still, all I could think about was my son, my boy, my only, James. I finally murmured, my voice thinner than it should have been. If he finds out what you've done, if he realizes you handed him 7 disasters wrapped in marble, and ocean views, what if he... I hesitated, breath catching. What if he hates you for it? It was the honest fear, the one I'd swallowed through every sentence in that letter. Not money, not property, but the fear of losing a child's love. James didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself or try to soften the truth. He simply looked at me with eyes already dimmed by illness and years of mistakes. If he hates me, he whispered, then at least he'll be alive long enough to. And God help me. A part of me understood. James lowered his gaze for a moment, as if searching for the strength to say what neither of us wanted to admit. The cafe around us hummed with small-town life. Clinking cups, soft chatter, the scrape of a chair on old wooden floors. But between us there was only the thin, fragile quiet of two people who had loved and failed and tried in all the ways they knew how. When he finally looked up, his eyes were steadier than before. "He'll understand," James said softly. "Maybe not now, maybe not for years, but one day when the noise fades, when the glitter falls away, he'll see that what I left him wasn't punishment." His voice broke just a little. It was protection. I felt my chest tighten, a dull ache blooming beneath the ribs. Fear, love, resentment, grief all tangled into something wordless. James reached across the table, fingertips brushing mine. "Ella, our son will hate me before he understands me, but he will understand." The memory of James' voice faded like a light dimming, and suddenly I was back in my quiet apartment, the letter trembling in my hands. The room felt smaller somehow, as if every wall had crept inch by inch toward me, while I'd been lost in the past. Then my phone rang. Dean's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my son's name glowing like a question I wasn't ready to answer. My throat tightened the way it does when a storm rolls in low and heavy. "Mom." His voice was careful, too careful, like he was afraid I might break if he spoke too loud. "I just wanted to check on you after today. Today, the will reading, Kinsley's cheers, my humiliation, the warehouse deed burning a hole in my purse." "I'm all right, sweetheart," I whispered, though the lie felt like a pebble under my tongue. There was a pause, the kind that hangs between a mother and a child who both sense that something is coming, something neither of them is prepared for. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" Dean cleared his throat on the other end of the line, that small sound he makes when he's trying to steady himself before saying something he already knows is foolish. "Kinsley, she hired an interior designer today." He began, voice thin as paper, "for the Biscayne house, $40,000 for the dining room alone." I closed my eyes. 40,000 for a room they didn't even live in, a room that wasn't even truly theirs. He rushed on like he needed to fill the silence before I could react. "She says it's necessary, that the houses need to reflect our new status. And she showed me renderings fabrics I can't pronounce. Chairs that cost more than your old Honda." There was a tremor in his laugh. Not amusement, fear, dressed up as humor. "Mom, does that sound—" He hesitated. "Does that sound normal to you?" I let my breath out slowly, praying he could hear the truth in the quiet. I let Dean's question hang for a moment, the way you sometimes let a wounded animal breathe before you get too close. His voice, it wasn't the voice of a man celebrating 7 mansions. It was the voice of a boy lost in a grown man's life. "Dean," I said gently, "have you looked at the property taxes yet?" The silence that followed felt like a small sharp crack spreading across glass. "Taxes," he repeated, as if the word itself were foreign. Kinsley said, "She said the lawyer probably handled all that, or that Dad prepaid something." I don't know. My heart squeezed. 40 years old and still believing comfort came baked into the world like icing on a cake. "Sweetheart," I murmured, "every house in Miami Beach has taxes, big ones, 7 houses. I swallowed. "It's a lot." He exhaled softly, not quite panic, but the first step toward it. "Mom, how much is a lot supposed to be?" Dean cleared his throat the way he used to when a teacher called on him and he hadn't done the reading. "Kinsley's handling all of it," he said quickly. She has spreadsheets, or she said she would. She's better with numbers than I am." There it was, the Dodge, soft as a shrug, but heavy enough to break a mother's heart. I could almost hear the way he leaned on her confidence, mistaking volume for certainty, style for substance. "Dean," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you know anything about the carrying costs? Insurance, utilities, upkeep?" He laughed a thin, embarrassed little sound. "Mom, please, don't make it sound like I'm irresponsible. Kinsley's got plans, designers, contractors. She says once everything's renovated, the houses will basically pay for themselves." My chest tightened. Oh, how easily people sold that lie, how quickly others bought it. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "dreams don't pay bills." "People do." I tried again, choosing my words the way you choose, where to place your feet on thin ice. "Dean, listen to me for a moment. 7 luxury homes don't magically balance themselves. You need to look at the numbers, not what Kinsley promises, what the papers actually say." Silence. A long one. I could picture him rubbing the back of his neck, eyes drifting anywhere but the truth, sitting right in front of him. "Mom," he said finally, soft but strained. "Can we not do this right now?" Kinsley's excited. "Dad just died. There's a lot happening. I just want—" He stopped searching for a way out. "I just want to enjoy this for a minute, okay?" There it was, my warning hitting nothing but air. "All right," I whispered, even though it was anything but. "But be careful, sweetheart." "Yeah," he murmured, already slipping away. "Kinsley says everything's under control." And just like that, my words fell into the quiet and disappeared. That evening, long after Dean's voice faded from the line, my phone buzzed again. A notification, bright, oblivious, lighting up a dark room. Kinsley Vale posted a new story. I shouldn't have opened it, but mothers do foolish things when worry is gnawing at their ribs. The screen filled with champagne glasses, clinking under Miami lights, the kind you only see in magazines or music videos. Music thumped in the background, filtered within an inch of its life. Kinsley twirled across one of her new living rooms, all echoing marble, and rented decadence, shrieking, 7 houses, baby manifestation works. Her friends cheered like she'd climbed Everest rather than inherited debt. Another clip, a rooftop pool, neon blue with her perched on the edge, tagging brands, hashtags spilling like confetti. Monroe legacy. Blessed life. Rich girl era. I sat there in the dim light of my modest little living room, watching her celebrate a future she didn't understand, and feeling the first cold edge of dread settle deep in my bones. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang again. Dean's name lit up the screen, no cheerful emoji this time, no hesitation, just his name, plain and trembling. "Mom." His voice was thin, stretched tight like something about to snap. Do you have a minute?" My stomach dropped. Mothers can sense when a child is calling from fear instead of convenience. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" He exhaled shakily. I tried to log into the property portal, just to look. Kinsley said I didn't need to, but I wanted to see for myself." A pause, then another. I could hear papers rustling, frantic, unsure. "Mom, there are bills I didn't even know existed. Insurance estimates, HOA dues I've never heard of. And the taxes, God, the taxes." His breath hitched. "Is this normal? Is it supposed to be like this?" I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "This is the beginning." Dean cleared his throat, but the sound came out shaky, almost brittle. "Mom, there's a line here I can't make sense of." "What line, sweetheart?" Another rustle of paper, a sharp inhale. "Quarterly property tax, due $218,000. He said it slowly, as if sounding it out might make it smaller. 218,000 for just 1 quarter. "Mom, that can't be right. That can't be real." My heart clenched, not because I didn't expect it, I had. James had shown me every grim calculation, but because hearing the disbelief in my son's voice felt like watching him discover fire by burning his own hand. "Dean." I whispered, "Miami Beach taxes are some of the highest in the country, but we have 7 houses." The panic finally cracked through, sharp and breathless. How is anyone supposed to pay? That I didn't answer right away. Some truths need space before they land. When I finally spoke, my voice was soft and unbearably honest. Sweetheart, your father never meant for you to. Dean, I said gently, before his breathing tipped into full panic. Listen to me. You're not crazy, and you're not failing. You're just finally seeing the numbers without the glitter. He didn't answer. I could hear him pacing the heavy, uneven steps of a man trying to outrun the truth. Sweetheart, I continued, before you sign, anything before you agree to renovations or loans, or whatever Kinsley is pushing, you need an independent audit. An audit. The word wavered in his throat like a child repeating something he didn't understand. Yes, a real accountant, someone who doesn't care about the mansions, someone who works for you. He exhaled shakily. Kinsley says that's overreacting. She says rich families don't waste money on extra accountants. I felt the sting of that, the old familiar pinch of being dismissed. Dean, I whispered steady as I could, rich families don't skip accountants. People pretending to be rich do. This time he didn't argue. There was a long pause on the line. Not the hesitant kind, the broken kind. The kind where a man realizes the ground under him isn't ground at all, just thin ice pretending to be. Mom, Dean said finally, voice low, ragged, stripped of every illusion he'd wrapped himself in. I don't think I can afford this. The words came out like a confession he'd been holding behind his teeth for weeks. I mean it, he added quickly, as if I might try to soothe him with lies. Even if I cut back. Even if I sold the cars and canceled the designers. Even if we moved into one of the houses and rented the others. The numbers don't work. They don't even come close. My heart twisted. Not in judgment, in recognition. Sweetheart, I whispered. No one can afford 7 mansions. He inhaled sharply, the truth finally landing. I think I'm in trouble. Mom, after Dean hung up, the apartment fell into that kind of silence that only comes after midnight. Soft, heavy, almost holy in its stillness. I sat at my kitchen table, the same scarred wooden one I'd had for years, a cup of tea gone cold beside me, and stared at the small drawer where I kept the key James left. The key to the safety deposit box, the box that held the truth. The lifeline, the end of my son's free fall. I traced the edge of the drawer with my fingertips, feeling the grain of the wood, the grooves worn by time and habit. My heart ached for Dean, for the boy who once believed the world was simple, for the man now realizing it was anything but. I could end this tonight. I could open the box, call him back, save him from drowning. But James's voice echoed through my memory. He has to learn Ella, not by words, by consequences. I closed the drawer and let the darkness sit with me. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet hum of the refrigerator fill the room. Funny how in moments like these, even the smallest sounds feel louder than your own heartbeat. James's voice drifted through my memory with painful clarity, that steady, thoughtful tone he used when he'd already made peace with a hard truth. Don't save him too early, Ella. If you do, he'll never learn what strength feels like. He has to see the bottom for himself. I closed my eyes, letting those words settle like stones in my chest. Back then, they'd felt harsh, almost cruel. Tonight, they felt prophetic. I pictured Dean pacing in some bright Miami kitchen, fear creeping up his spine, the first cracks forming in the life he thought he inherited. Every instinct in me wanted to run to him, to shield him the way I did when he was small. And storms scared him. But James had been right. Some storms a man has to stand in alone. The next afternoon, just as I was folding laundry in the living room, I heard a car door slam hard, like someone trying to make a point with the pavement. I peeked through the blinds, a white Maserati, engine still running, sun blazing off the hood like it was offended to be parked in my modest lot. And then I saw her, Kinsley Vale, storm in high heels, anger wrapped in expensive fabric, moving with the purpose of someone who believes the world owes her explanations and apologies in equal measure. Before I could reach the door, the bell rang 3 times, each press sharper than the last. I opened it a crack, Ella, she snapped, sweeping past me without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. Her perfume hit the room before she did. Sweet, loud, overbearing. Her eyes, even louder. The storm had arrived, and it was wearing designer shoes. Kinsley planted herself in the middle of my living room, like she owned the deed to the floorboards. Her breath came fast, sharp anger wearing perfume. Ella, you need to talk to Dean, she said, pacing like a caged thing. He's panicking, overreacting. He's talking about selling houses, selling Ella. Do you understand what that looks like? What people will think? I folded my arms, steadying myself. Dean's trying to survive Kinsley. She waved that off as if survival were an optional accessory. No, he's being dramatic. He needs support, he needs clarity, and he listens to you. Her voice dropped into a pleading hiss. Tell him to keep the houses, all 7. Tell him this is just an adjustment period. I stared at her. 7 mansions, hundreds of thousands in taxes. Mortgages stacked like dominoes waiting for a stiff breeze. Kinsley, I said softly, why are you so afraid of him selling them? Her lips parted, just a flicker of truth, fear, desperation before. She masked it again with indignation. Because she snapped, he doesn't understand what we stand to lose. I didn't argue with her. Arguing with someone like Kinsley is like shouting into a hurricane, all wind, no direction. Instead, I walked to the small cabinet beside my dining table, slid open the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thick folder I'd kept hidden for weeks. The paper edges were worn from my hands, not from reading, but from resisting the urge to open it too soon. Kinsley's eyes narrowed. What is that? I didn't answer. I simply moved to the table, laid the folder down, and gently fanned out the documents. Geological surveys, corporate letters of intent, preliminary royalty calculations. Signatures from executives who wouldn't even return a phone call, unless there were millions involved. She stepped closer, confusion tightening her face. Ella, what is all this? I met her gaze, calm and unhurried, letting the weight of the papers speak before I did. These, I said softly, are the things you never thought to ask about. Kinsley leaned over the table, her glossy hair falling forward as she scanned the pages. At first, her expression was irritation, the kind you give a grocery receipt you didn't ask for. Then her eyes caught a number, stopped, widened. Her lips parted without sound. 8 million, she whispered, voice collapsing into itself. Per year. I could almost hear the gears in her mind, grinding luxury status 7 mansions, all of it screeching against the hard truth in black ink. She snatched up another page, then another, each one confirming what she desperately wanted not to believe. This can't be real. Her voice shook. These companies, Nestle, Coca-Cola, they wouldn't pay this much for a warehouse in Mississippi. For the warehouse, I corrected gently, no. Then I placed a finger on the geological survey. But for what sits underneath it, they'd pay even more. Her face drained of color foundation, failing to hide the fear rising to the surface. Because for the first time in her life, Kinsley Vale finally understood what she didn't inherit. She stood, frozen papers trembling slightly between her manicured fingers. I watched the realization sink into her slow, icy, irreversible. Kinsley, I said softly, taking the documents from her hands and setting them flat again, that warehouse you laughed at, the one everyone dismissed. I tapped the top page, the projected royalty totals. That land could feed 3 generations. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Quiet truths have their own thunder. 3 generations, I repeated, without debt, without yachts, without mansions bleeding money faster than you can decorate them. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was trying to breathe underwater. You mean, this is Ella money, not Monroe money? She stammered. I gave her a sad little smile, the kind a teacher gives when a student finally sees the answer that's been in front of them all along. No, sweetheart, I said. This is earned money, built money, sustainable money. I folded the papers gently, and it was never meant for you to spend. Kinsley pressed both hands to her mouth, as if trying to hold something inside, but it was no use. The first tear slipped down, cutting a line through her perfect makeup. then another, and suddenly she was sobbing, not the delicate kind she performed at parties, but raw, shaking, terrified. "Why didn't you tell me she choked out? Why would you let me think you were poor, that you got nothing?" Her voice cracked on the last word, as if the idea still offended her. I felt a pinch of something like pity, not for the loss she imagined, but for the blindness she'd worn like jewelry. "Kinsley," I said gently, "you didn't ask. You were too busy celebrating what you thought you won." She shook her head hard, mascara streaking. I wouldn't have... I mean, if I'd known you'd have behaved differently, I finished for her. She froze, because we both knew the answer, and it was the very thing James had planned for her to reveal. Kinsley stood there, breath-hitching, eyes shining with panic, and something that looked uncomfortably close to regret. I let the silence hang for a moment. Sometimes truth needs a little space before it's spoken. Then I said quietly but firmly, "Kinsley, I didn't tell you because my son doesn't need more illusions. He needs the truth." She blinked at me, stunned. Dean has spent his whole life surrounded by surfaces. Pretty ones, polished ones, but they were still just surfaces. And for a while he let himself believe your confidence was the same thing as stability. I stepped closer, not unkindly, but I tapped the folder. "This is real. This can't be posted on Instagram or poured into infinity pools. This is work and stewardship and responsibility, the things Dean was never taught to value because people kept handing him comfort instead." Kinsley swallowed hard. "So no," I said softly. "I didn't tell you, because my son needed truth, not another person selling him dreams." It was 2:47 in the morning when my phone rang. The kind of hour when only emergencies or heartbreak reach for you. The screen glowed in the dark. Dean's name trembling in pale blue light. I answered before the second ring. "Mom." His voice, God, it wasn't just tired. It was cracked clean through like something inside him had finally given way. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" A shaky breath, then another, the kind a grown man tries to hide when he's standing on the edge of something he can't make sense of. "Mom, I think everything's falling apart." The words came out small, scared the way he used to sound, after nightmares when he was little. But this wasn't something I could scoop him up from. This was the kind of nightmare that bills itself as adulthood. "I can't sleep," he whispered. I can't make the numbers work. I've tried everything, Mom, and nothing adds up." His voice broke. "Mom, I think I'm losing everything." There was a sound on the line, not quite a sob, not quite a breath. Something caught between pride and collapse. "Mom." He paused as if the next words tasted like metal in his mouth. "I think I'm going bankrupt." The word hung there trembling. "Dean," I whispered, but he pushed on voice, unraveling thread by thread. "I've run the numbers 100 times. The mortgages, the taxes, the penalties. Kinsley keeps saying it'll work out, that I just need to stay positive, but positivity doesn't cover $200,000 in quarterly taxes." He let out a choked laugh, thin, hollow, breaking. "I don't even have enough in my savings to cover 1 month of this, Mom. Not one." My chest tightened, an old ache returning, the ache of watching your child discover the world is not padded. "Sweetheart." "No," he whispered. "I need to say it. A breath, a surrender. Mom, I'm going to lose everything." The morning after Dean's call, I didn't bother with breakfast. Grief sits heavy, but purpose. Purpose will carry a body farther than food. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my worn jacket, and drove toward Yazoo City under a sky still soft with dawn. The highway stretched quiet and pale, the kind of gray-blue light that makes everything feel suspended, like the world hasn't quite decided what it's going to be yet. The bank sat on the corner of Main Street, the same brick building James dragged me into years ago when he insisted on long-term planning. I hadn't understood then. I did now. The teller recognized me. Small towns do that. "Morning, Mrs. Monroe. You here for the box?" I nodded, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "Yes, box 247. She led me to the steel vault, cold and humming with secrets. When she left me alone, I slipped the thin key into the lock. My hand trembled, and when the lid lifted, James's plan rose into the light. Inside the box, everything was arranged with that careful order James always kept, even at the end, even when his hands had begun to shake. Contracts, surveys, letters sealed in cream envelopes, and then one document sat on top as if he wanted it to be the first thing I touched. I lifted it gently, a deed, fresh ink, 2 names, Ella Monroe, Dean Monroe, co-owners. My breath caught not from surprise, but from the tenderness of it. James hadn't just planned for me to catch our son. He'd planned for our son to rise beside me. He'd known Dean would break. He'd known I couldn't watch him drown. But he also knew something I hadn't let myself believe. Dean wasn't meant to be rescued. He was meant to rebuild. My fingers traced James's signature, steady, deliberate, hopeful. "Oh, James," I whispered into the quiet vault. "You left him more than a second chance. You left him a future he'd have to earn." I walked out of the bank with the folder pressed to my chest, as if the papers inside were something living, fragile, warm, waiting. The morning sun had climbed higher, dusting Main Street, in that soft Mississippi gold I'd always loved. The kind Dean had forgotten existed. Sitting in my car, I took a long breath. Then I pulled out my phone. He answered on the second ring, voice hoarse, from a night without sleep. "Mom." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Dean," I said gently, "I need you to listen. A beat, a heartbeat. Sweetheart, come home." He exhaled sharply. "Home." "Yes," I whispered. "Come to Mississippi. Today. There's something you need to see. Something your father left for you. And you won't understand it until you're standing here." Silence. Not fear this time. Something else. Something softer. "Mom," he murmured, Is this about the warehouse?" I looked at the folder in my lap. "It's about your future Dean. Come home." Dean arrived just before sunset. I heard his car before I saw it, the tired hum of an engine that had seen too many miles in too few days. When he stepped out, my heart clenched in that instinctive, ancient way only mothers understand. He looked worn, not just physically, but spiritually, edges dulled, posture slightly collapsed inward, as if the weight of the world had finally settled on his shoulders and refused to budge. His eyes were rimmed red cheeks, hollowed shoulders, tense beneath a wrinkled shirt he'd probably slept in. "Mom," he breathed, and the word carried everything he hadn't been able to say for weeks: fear, shame, hope, apology. I opened my arms, and he stepped into them without hesitation, without pride, like a boy coming home from a long storm. When he finally pulled back, he looked at the warehouse, our warehouse, with confusion and exhaustion woven together. So he whispered, voice trembling, "This is where Dad wanted me to be." I led Dean inside the warehouse, the air cool and quiet, dust drifting through shafts of dying sunlight, like memories suspended in motion. The old conference table sat in the center of the room. Scarred, sturdy, still standing after all these years. "Sit down, sweetheart," I murmured. He did, shoulders slumped, hands clasped in front of him, like he was bracing for another blow. I set the folder on the table, opened it with a care that felt almost ceremonial, and pulled out the large geological map, the one James had folded a dozen times and smoothed out a dozen more. Slowly, I spread it across the wood. Contours, aquifer lines, mineral layers, the quiet brilliance of the delta beneath our feet. Dean leaned forward, brow furrowing. "Mom, what am I looking at?" I touched the center of the map, right where the warehouse sat. "You're looking," I said softly, "at the reason your father gave you 7 houses and gave me this piece of dirt." I looked up into his tired eyes. "And the reason only one of those gifts was meant to save you." Dean pulled the map closer, fingertips tracing the lines as if the truth might warm under his touch. I handed him the next stack, the surveys, the extraction projections, the preliminary contracts with numbers that still stunned me, no matter how many times I read them. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink, just read, line after line, page after page, his face shifting in slow, painful degrees confusion. Disbelief, and then that hollow ache of realization settling behind his eyes. The room felt impossibly quiet, the kind of quiet where time holds its breath. A full minute passed, maybe more, before he finally set the papers down. His hands stayed on them, palms flat, as if letting go might make all of it disappear. When he finally looked up at me, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, this is real. All of it." I nodded once, and the last of his illusions crumbled. But something steadier, quieter began to rise in their place. Dean kept staring at the stack of documents, his thumb resting on the corner of the top page. Not moving, not speaking, just breathing the way a person does when the truth finally overwhelms the lies they've been trying to outrun. Then his eyes lifted to mine, tired red, but clearer than I'd seen in months. Dad knew, he whispered. It wasn't a question at first. It was a realization falling out of him like a stone. He swallowed hard, then softer, didn't he, Mom? He knew all of this, before the houses, before the debt, before he exhaled shakily, before I even understood what money was. I reached over, covering his hand with mine. His skin was warm, trembling. Yes, I said, no hesitation, no softening. Your father saw the fall coming long before you did. Dean's throat tightened, the truth cutting deep but clean, and he planned for it. I squeezed his hand gently. He planned, I murmured, for you to rise. Dean's eyes searched mine, almost like he was hoping I'd contradict myself. Tell him there'd been some mistake, some oversight, something that didn't place so much weight on his shoulders. But I didn't look away. I nodded slow and sure. Your father believed in you, Dean, even when you didn't believe in yourself. His jaw trembled, not from weakness, from the shock of finally being seen by a man he'd spent years trying to impress without ever realizing he already had. He thought I could handle this, he whispered. No, I said gently. He thought you could grow into the man who could handle it. Dean blinked hard, a tear slipping free, despite the way he tried to hide it with his hand. He trusted you, I repeated, voice soft but steady. Not with the mansions, not with the show, with the real legacy, the one that requires integrity, not image. He looked down at the map again, breathing uneven. He believed I was worth that I squeezed his fingers. He believed you were worth everything. 6 months later, the warehouse didn't look anything like the hollow shell Dean first walked into. I stood in the doorway of what was now our office, bright, clean, humming with quiet purpose, and let myself take it in. Sunlight spilled across polished concrete floors. Desks lined the walls, not fancy, but sturdy, chosen for work, not for display. Whiteboards held flowcharts, extraction schedules, environmental impact notes scribbled in Dean's handwriting. The same boy who once avoided bank statements was now hunched over quarterly reports. Brow furrowed in that focused way James used to have. He didn't wear designer clothes anymore, just rolled sleeves, calloused hands, a coffee mug with Yazoo. Strong printed crookedly on the side, a gift from one of the students in the training program. The office smelled faintly of paper-fresh paint and a future built the slow, honest way. Mom, Dean called from his desk. Nestlé wants to expand their extraction cycle. We need to run projections. I smiled, heart full. My son was no longer running from numbers. He was running toward them. That afternoon, I passed by the conference room and saw Dean meeting with Dr. Benjamin Whitaker, the hydrologist from Ole Miss, whom James had admired for years. 6 months ago, Dean wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in a technical meeting. Now he was leading one. Dr. Whitaker had spread graphs and recharge models across the table, the kind of dense scientific data that used to make Dean's eyes glaze over. But today he leaned forward, elbows on the table, absorbing every detail. So if we increase extraction by 40%, Dean said, tapping a chart, the aquifer recharge rate drops below safe thresholds. Yes, Dr. Whitaker replied. Short-term profit, but long-term damage. Sustainable extraction means patience. Dean nodded slowly, thoughtfully. We're not touching the volume until we run multi-year simulations, he said. If it isn't sustainable, it isn't success. I stood in the doorway, unseen, watching my son speak with a calm, grounded authority I'd never witnessed in him before. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pretending. He was becoming the man his father hoped he'd someday be. 2 years passed, the kind that don't rush. They settle, slow, honest, like Mississippi seasons. On a warm May morning, I found myself sitting on a folding chair under a white canopy at the Delta Technical Training Center, a place Dean helped rebuild with the first year of royalties. The air smelled of cut grass and hope, and the stage was decorated with handmade banners from students who'd spent their lives thinking opportunity was something only other towns had. Dean stood at the podium in a simple navy shirt. Sleeves rolled, no spotlight needed. His voice carried steady as he spoke to the graduating class, young men and women who'd learned welding, hydrology basics, plant maintenance, water testing, skills that could anchor a community. When they called his name as program director, the applause rose like a wave, not loud, not fancy, but full, real. I watched him shake hands, hug students, wipe his eyes when he thought no one noticed. My boy, once drowning, now teaching others how to build rafts. A week after the graduation ceremony, I stopped by the office to drop off some homemade cornbread. Dean was at his desk, sorting through a stack of mail bills, supplier invoices, student applications, all the ordinary pieces of a life built on steadiness instead of spectacle. Then he froze. His hand hovered over a white envelope. I saw the handwriting before he said her name. Kinsley. He opened it slowly, carefully, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. Inside was a single page folded twice. He read it silently, jaw tightening, then softening. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "She wants to join the reintegration program," he murmured. "Says she's trying to rebuild. Says she's sorry." I studied his face, not searching for bitterness, but for the man he'd become. "What do you think, Dean?" He set the letter down gently. "I think everyone deserves a chance to start over," he said, "but not an advantage." There was no spite in his voice, only clarity, only growth. Dean held the letter for a long moment, turning it over in his hands, the way you might handle something fragile, not out of affection, but out of respect for what it represented. A closed chapter, trying awkwardly to reopen itself. He finally set it on the table and leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what Dad tried to teach me, about what you've been teaching me these last few years." I waited. Some truths take time to rise to the surface. He nodded toward the letter. "Kinsley wants in, and she can have a place here, but the same place anyone else gets." He looked at me, then eyes, steady voice, calm in a way that only comes after a man has been broken and rebuilt by his own hands. "No special treatment," he said. "No shortcuts, no privilege. A small breath, almost a promise. But everyone deserves a chance." That evening, after the last student left and the office lights dimmed, Dean and I walked out to the far edge of the property, the place where the cracked concrete gave way to wild grass, and the sky always felt a little bigger. The sun was slipping low, casting that soft orange wash over everything. Mississippi has a way of ending the day gently, even when life hasn't been gentle at all. Dean slid his hands into his pockets, breathing in the warm air. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever look at all this and wonder how we got here?" I smiled. Every day, we stood side by side watching the light settle over the land, the warehouse, the fields, the quiet future humming beneath the soil. He let out a slow breath, shoulders easing not in defeat, but in peace. A peace he'd earned inch by inch. "Mom," he murmured, voice thick with gratitude and something like awe. "We really did it, didn't we?" I slipped my arm through his. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "We rebuilt." There's a kind of quiet that only comes after surviving yourself. Standing beside Dean in that honey-colored light, I felt it settle over us, gentle, steady, certain. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for applause, only breath. I've lived long enough to know that rich is a word people misunderstand. They think it shines, they think it sparkles. But real richness, it sits deeper, lower, closer to the bone. Rich isn't money. Rich is the lesson you bleed for before you understand. Rich is having someone who loves you enough not to save you too early. Someone who lets you stumble so you can learn the strength of your own legs. Rich is the courage, quiet, stubborn, ordinary, to rebuild with your own hands even when the world counted you out. I looked at my son taller somehow in the fading light and felt the truth settle in my chest. Dean. I whispered, we are wealthy in all the ways that matter. What's the hardest lesson life ever taught you? And what did it give you in return?